A few of us had the opportunity to attend the Southern Plains Drought Summit in Pratt, Kansas, and meet up with a few of the presenters, one of which was Keith Harmoney, a range scientist with the Ag Research Center in Hays, Kansas. With Ag AM in Kansas, I'm Devin Stewart. Harmoney discussed what has been documented about the plant populations and cover in western Kansas during previous droughts, how precipitation amount and timing affects our rangeland yields for making stocking decisions, and how precipitation affects animal production or performance on rangelands. Harmoney first talks about the comparison to grassland growths in previous extended droughts, like the 1930s and 1950s.
The droughts of the 30s and 50s, of course, we know how long those were. This drought, we don't know how long it's going to carry on. But there were studies that were performed in the 30s and 50s where they actually tracked grass populations and grass cover in pastures of different of stocking rates. And in some of those historical research observations, they found that the drought of the 1930s had a big impact on what the ground cover and grass population was of those pastures that they studied. In particular, out at Hays, where our research center is located, some of the pastures around there specifically, they found that the pastures that were heavily grazed, that were dominated by blue grama and buffalo grass prior to the drought, at the start of the drought, after a few years of drought, those pastures greatly declined in grass cover to the point that there was very little ground cover of plant material left. The population of buffalo grass and blue grama almost disappeared in some of those places. In moderate stocked pastures, the same thing occurred, but it occurred more slowly. So the amount of grazing that took place prior to the drought occurring had a big impact on how quickly those grass populations and that cover declined. In the years of that 30s drought, 1936 seemed to be the year that much of that grass disappearance occurred. During the recovery portion, after 1936, where most of those areas hit their lowest cover point, buffalo grass seemed to be the grass that recovered the quickest because it was a grass that has stolons, and those stolons come from a perennial part of the plant, so it's able to those stolons spread out across the ground and repopulate the area, whereas blue grama is a bunch grass that repopulates by seed. Now, in the 1950s, we also saw some plant cover loss. As far as what our records are at the Hays Research Center, the plant loss wasn't as great as what was observed during that 1930s time period, but we still did suffer some stand loss.
Let's talk a little bit about the adjusted stocking rates.
Well, adjusted stocking rates kind of go with a drought plan, I guess you could say. For producers that prior to drought practice a moderate recommended stocking rate for their rangelands, our rangelands are pretty resilient, and they can usually handle 1 year of abnormally low or abnormally high precipitation just fine. That's what moderate stocking rates are for, is they kind of take that into account, that you're not going to get the same precipitation amount every year. So folks that start out with a moderate stocking rate are going to, a moderate or light stocking rate are going to have a little bit of flexibility. It's when you add on multiple years of dry conditions that things will tend to get more difficult to manage and to predict what's going to happen.
Can you talk a little bit about the factors involved in that?
Yeah,
then?
and that's where having a drought plan comes into play. So when you do get more than one season of dry weather, having a plan where you initially have moderate recommended stocking rates, and you have stocking strategies that allow you to have a vigorous grass stand, that you have enough cover on your pastures to to protect it from erosion and to help water infiltrate when you do get rainfall. All those things come into part of an overall plan. And then you also, in a drought plan, can include to have time periods where you make certain decisions. And one of those decisions might be to when you decide that you're going to reduce your stocking rates. At the end of one growing season, if you have a pasture that has been stressed in some manner the prior year, whether that be from it was grazed heavier than what you wanted it to be or should have been, or if it was stressed from dry weather, all those things have an effect on the vigor or the status of that grass stand to come into the next year.
Keith, how much of a detriment on grazing performance can a cattle producer expect if it remains dry?
Well, we have records of cattle performance that go along with our precipitation records and our pasture production. As far as grassland yield records go, we also have animal data that go along with that. And in the data that I've looked at, there actually is a negative trend with in cattle performance with increased precipitation, which is kind of counterintuitive of what most folks would think. As we increase precipitation during the season, our individual cattle performance over the 35 years of data that I looked at actually declined. And I think a lot of that has to do with plant maturity. The grasses in our pastures, they need moisture to grow and mature. And if we get early moisture, April, May, June moisture, those grasses then have the moisture they need to grow and mature. And as they mature, they put on seed heads, they lignify, and they become lower in forage quality. And I think with the drought or dry years, with drought situations, that maturity is delayed. So we have vegetation that is higher quality longer into the season. And what my summary is of that is that our cattle during drought years, as long as they have enough forage, they should have good performance. It's when our cattle run out of forage, or if they are having to graze on prior year's residual forage, that's old dormant grass that is of lower quality, then they probably could have lower animal performance.
With Ag AM in Kansas, I'm Devin Stewart.